Welcome to the Dynamic Leadership Daily Live series. Today I'm going to talk about a powerful tool that's been around for over a century, and I'm going to unpack why it is so powerful as a lever in making dynamic leadership practical and actionable. In most leadership and communication training, questions are treated as tools for insight, ways to help someone think more clearly after emotion is already formed. Dynamic leadership uses questions differently. A well-timed question changes what the brain believes. It's solving in the moment, and that alters the emotion before it fully forms. The network of neurons is constantly predicting reality. When it becomes certain that a threat exists, the system narrows toward rigidity. When overwhelmed, it expands into chaos. Between those two states is coherence, focus, and engage, where clear thinking and effective action become possible. The goal is not emotional control. The goal is steering the trajectory early enough that control becomes unnecessary. It's a huge point. Rapid recovery is what creates the appearance of stability. The brain may briefly initiate a reaction, but trained interception prevents it from becoming behavior. To observers, nothing happened. To the individual, it feels like presence rather than suppression. This is why dynamic leadership operates above regulation and before regulation rather than after it, influencing activation instead of repairing consequences. Questions in this model are diagnostic and regulatory levers, but regulatory closer to the prevention side rather than the corrective side. They interrupt automatic pattern completion, reveal direction of escalation, and allow the leader to guide the system back toward coherence in real time before any damage is done. I'm talking literally in hundredths of a second, tenths of a second. Stability and presence doesn't mean no reaction. It means correction happened faster than anyone could see. Before we explore specific emotional intelligence questions, I'd like you to keep three anchors in mind. One, we're steering emotional formation, not managing emotional aftermath. Stability is usually rapid recovery occurring before expression. The objective state is focus and engage, not calm and not intensity. It's focus and engage. That's what we're after. All right. All right. What I'm going to do first is take a look at the at what's going on to set up the conversation about questions. There's a different look than what we've had before, and I think it's important to understand this because I use as a backdrop traction control, and looking at traction control and anti-lock brake systems, the way that they interrupt the process of a skid happening, whether accelerating, which is loss of traction, or braking, which is a skid, it interrupts it in the process. So to the observer, to someone who's driving or watching, it doesn't look like any skid ever happened. But if you look at it from an engineering perspective, yes, a skid did happen, but it happened in a millisecond or two and got corrected before it was even noticeable. So by the time you notice it, it just passes. Remember, the reaction time of the conscious mind is a half a second. The uh, subconscious is a quarter of a second, and for athletes, it's 150 milliseconds. And this explains why you see race car drivers going through training to improve their response time, their reaction time, because you do feel a skid before your conscious mind is aware of it. And as racers, track driving, you train yourself so that as you feel those skids, you're adjusting. That's why you see the steering wheel constantly, the hands constantly on the steering wheel, just doing this. They're actually reacting to what they feel, and they're doing it at the hundredth of a second level. Now, I mentioned that we have There's 3 zones here. You have fight or flight. You have coherence. And in between, you have focus and engage. And this is where we want to be. It's not flow. I've used the terminology flow just to simplify it, but now that we're getting into making it practical and what leaders are going to do, remember, this is leadership, taking dynamic leadership from personal leadership to leading others. So I want to get more specific with the language, because a flow state is something that you're involved in a particular process, and you may not need intensity. You may not want to be intense at that moment. It's more of a lower level that's sustainable for a long period of time. Focus and engage is different, because you can be very intense and focus and engage. You can be very calm and focus and engage. That's why calm or intensity is not the objective. It's focus and engage. And that's a shorter period of time. You get it resolved, and that ties into the 7-step reset. 7-step reset is the foundation of dynamic leadership, because we're resetting the conditioning from what we had from 0 to 7 to something that aligns with our quest. If you think about a graph, on one side of the graph, we have effort, and on the other side, we have impact. So this is a multi-dimension graph here. And this, on the bottom, we have time. And I'm going to list the time in tenths of a second. So each one of these is a tenth of a second. Etc. And here's what's going on. This line at that half-second mark, and of course this changes with situation. If a person's already triggered, their conscious reaction time will be a lot faster. Their subconscious will be faster. If you watch somebody being triggered or responding to a phobia, you see that reaction time happening a lot faster. But the generally accepted answer is a half-second. So we have a line here. This line is at the half-second mark. When you make changes on the network of neurons side, which is what this is over here. Let's fix this slide. All right. When you make changes on the network of neurons side, it's so much faster, like hundreds of thousands of times faster than when you make them on the conscious mind side. The reason is because over here you have 50 bits per second processing speed. And over here you have 11 million bits per second processing speed. So, I mean, clearly it's obvious that this side is going to be faster. So we measure things in milliseconds over here, and you measure things in seconds over here. And these tenths of a second, 10 tenths of a second, are my 1 second model. What I'm doing is I'm simulating my 1 second model there. And the 1 second model has 7 phases. I'll show you that in a slide. But here's what I want to point out. On this side, the effort is very low at the beginning. Let me back up. When it comes time to regulating, let's do this because I skipped a step and I want to make sure we're on the same page. When it comes time to regulating, which you hear a lot in emotional intelligence. So regulating is this process that includes prevention and I don't mean prevention of something happening. I mean prevention of escalating. We can't stop a triggering circumstance to come our way. We can't stop that unless you just stop living and avoid everything. But you can prevent the escalation that follows that stimulus. Over here we have corrective. And then in the middle you have modulation. So when we talk about emotional regulation, we can be talking about any one of these phases. Most of the time when people are attempting to regulate, they're regulating over here on this side after the fact. Why? Because they're regulating after the conscious mind has become involved, and that's where you start seeing suppression, you start seeing hacks, you start seeing people doing different types of things, and there are some good. The breathing, implementation intentions would have worked more over here, but they may go into breathing. They may, just calm. They may settle. It's different things. You can change your attention. There are things you can do over here to help regulate. The challenge is you're correcting something that's already underway. Over here, prevention of escalation, if you can get it early enough, there's no need for modulation. And there's certainly no need for corrective action. It's happening. It's getting resolved over here. This is why I use the example of a skid. If you look at a graph at a microscope, the skid starts over here. This is the point of a skid starting, and you'll see the tire tearing in the beginning. And then after that tire starts tearing, it accelerates. Now it's slipping. And then by the time you get over here, you can still fix it here, but by the time you get over here, it's way up there somewhere. That's what it looks like through a microscope. Traction control catches it here and brings it back on track. So it corrects it and then brings it back on track. And what it's doing is it's pulsing the power on traction side. It's pulsing the power that's getting to the wheels so that the tire can get traction again. And the way it's measuring it, it's using like a stroboscope, where it's a phonic wheel, different approaches, but it's essentially something spinning and a scope is watching it. And as it slows down, as it speeds up to beyond a threshold, it knows it needs to stop it. I'm almost talking about ABS versus traction control. So traction control works in one direction. The wheels should be spinning at a known rate. When it loses traction, it speeds up above that. That phonic wheel tells the computer it's spinning beyond threshold. The computer reduces the power that's available to the wheels, but it's happening in milliseconds level, so you don't even notice it. And if you ever turn off your traction control, especially on a wet day, and you hit the gas, you will notice it very quickly. But by the time you notice it, it's already out of line. The car's already out of line by the time you notice it, because traction control is that good. ABS is the opposite. ABS is looking at a phonic wheel, same principle. And if the car is moving and the wheel gets to a stopped spot with the brakes on, and the wheel gets too close to stopping, it knows that the next thing is a skid. So it backs off the brakes. It's like if you learned how to drive in the 80s, 70s or 80s or earlier, you learned pump the brakes. That's essentially is what it's doing, but it's not pumping it randomly. It's literally adjusting the amount of brake pressures to stay right on that edge of maximum traction. That's how traction control works. How that relates here is it's all unseen, and it's all happening over on this side right here. So back to this graph. In the beginning, effort in the beginning to regulate, right? To regulate in the beginning, effort is very low. And even at 0.3 of a second, it's still relatively low. It's still relatively low even at a half a second. But then at a half second, it reaches the conscious mind side. And now the threat response is already underway. And the effort increases dramatically in that first half second. The first half second, you can still modulate it. And this is not a scientific graph. This is a graph I'm drawing that's aligned with how the system works, and it's going to be different for different people. Now, conversely, impact. So that's impact, and this is effort. So we know what the graph is doing. On impact, catching it early, you're way up here. And even at 0.3 and 0.5, it's still good. And then it hands off to the conscious mind, and the impact starts to decline. Now you can still catch it. And this is where we do emotional modulation. So there's a modulation that happens here that's habitual. There's an emotional modulation that happens over here that's conscious mind. It's directed by the conscious mind. Both of them do the same thing, except that one is happening like traction control happens under the radar, and it's habitual because you notice a sensation coming up and you automatically modulate, emotionally modulate. And that's just a learned behavior. And then you have the conscious mind side. And so we start here, obviously, and work our way so we can get modulation over here. So that's the view that I wanted to have. And yeah, so that's the story that we're doing with dynamic leadership. We're doing it over here. What I wanted to say about the traction control is that the word dynamic comes into play because with motorcycles, as they lean, there's the amount of traction in any direction is reduced because it's now being separated with vectors. There's a vector going this way and a vector going this way. So the traction has to be shared between two vectors. So you have 100% traction straight up and down. When you're leaned over, you may only have 30% of your traction to stop a slide to the side. Same with braking. If you're braking, you may have 100% while you're straight up and down. But as you lean over, you may have 70% of your traction available for braking. That's so the dynamic comes in because it's looking at the lean angle and it's adjusting the traction control sensitivity real time based on the lean angle. And there's different ways of doing it. You also do it just with the phonic wheel, but the ideal way, or the one that's more common, is just literally having the computer. The same way if you take your phone and do level, you can tell how many degrees it's leaning. So it's that same concept. When the motorcycle leans, it changes the sensitivity of the traction control. Now, we'll look at how this works, because I said in the introduction that most leadership and communication, it talks about questions. And I said in dynamic leadership, we use questions differently. So let me just do a quick refresher on questions. First, this is aligned with emotional intelligence, and I don't take anything away from emotional intelligence. It's just that when emotional intelligence was created in the mid 90s, the the access to the brain scanning tools that teach us about myelin and synapses and synaptogenesis, that pruning process, and uh, how neurotransmitters actually change mood and how they amplify, how dopamine can amplify the signal. It's not just a habit formation neurotransmitter, it also amplifies the system. So the more neurotransmitter you have, the stronger your signal can be, the more you can get out of a muscle. So plateaus, when you're in weightlifting, those plateaus that happen, they're less about muscle and more about neurotransmitter signal, because the brain is always working to have efficiency or stability at status quo. And what we are doing with dynamic leadership is using that same system, but to have stability at allostasis. So homeostasis would be at status quo. Allostasis would be an upward trajectory. And what the leader is going to do is manage that trajectory real time using dynamic leadership. And the same way that a motorcycle's traction control waits for the motorcycle to lean before it engages and then adjusts the sensitivity to the traction control, so does a leader. You can't do it until something happens. You engage when something happens. And that's why it's important to know that the earlier you do it, the more powerful, the greater, the less effort and greater the impact. So this is what we're dealing with all the time. Anytime you're a leader and moving from one place to another, moving a team from one place to another, this is what you're going through. We have a comfort zone that's very common and understood. And then this barrier is very difficult. And here's when you're trying to cross this barrier, this is where you get people going back to what they've done before. They come up with reasons why it doesn't work. I remember in sales training, getting someone to call, you have all this call reluctance in here that you have to work through. I used to take people out and we would go, I would be demonstrating, doing cold calling on businesses. And I'd walk in the door and I'd let them go first. And then I'll say, you got this one. And sometimes I wouldn't even go in. I would just stay outside so that they could do it and only focus on the customer. And sometimes, on the extreme, they turn around and run back out. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to sell, but it just tells me what I'm dealing with. Other times they rise to the occasion and they come out, their eyes are big and they're excited and they want to do it again. Other times they're very introspective. They're, well, I could have done this better. It doesn't matter. The point is I had to get them through this and all this noise. And that's call reluctance. And if you wait for somebody to be ready to make cold calls, you'll be waiting a long time. If you do what I just described, it happens very quickly. But this happens every time you're going to break through. This is why you see so much incremental when it comes time to making a transformation, because the transformation means breaking through, and a breakthrough is to break with what was the norm before. That breakthrough is combined with confusion, it's combined with cognitive dissonance, it's combined with fear, because excitement and anxiety can have the same signature. By knowing what's going on and by seeing it in advance, you can spot it. And I will treat, when I'm working with a person and I see this happening, if we know what their purpose is, that's why I start with purpose, or their goal or vision or proxy for one of those. If we're working towards that and I know that they really want it because we've had those conversations, then I push through this because I realize it's just cognitive dissonance. It's the cognitive dissonance that comes because we're attempting to do something that we believed could not be done. Again, seeing it happen, and then the solution. What's the solution for cognitive dissonance? You don't explain. You don't go through the process. You just ignore it. Do something else. When you go to sleep, that's when the neuroplasticity happens in a big way. Neuroplasticity is always happening, at least at a low level, but when you're sleeping, that's when the brain really resets. And you wake up the next day. When this cognitive dissonance is because you're attempting to do something that you thought was impossible, as an example. You wake up the next day with answers because you've gone from your nervous system, the network of neurons has gone from fear, we're doing something we've never done before. This is scary. There's all coming up with all these reasons not to do it. But then when you go through it, the nervous system flips and it does what it's designed to do, which is make sure that you survive. So it flips from fear based to we got to figure this out. We got to figure this out to you go from fight or flight to focus and engage because now you have to do something. And this is why I talk about allostasis creating the trajectory. We want to maintain focus and engage, which means we have to avoid the fight or flight. And you can't avoid the person getting prepped for fight or flight, but you can spot it and do something on purpose to turn it around. And that's what we'll be talking about today with the questions. And then you have a new problem once you're above because the unfamiliar and the unknown is treated by the subconscious or the network of neurons as a threat. And we don't want to constantly be in threat. And this is where we take a page from Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice, and we focus on methodical, simple, and consistency. Simple, methodical, and consistent. That's what we want to do here. And I say methodical, it aligns with your strengths. So strengths, consistency, and simplicity, but you're using a methodology that aligns with your strengths. And then you can, I'm not going to say totally ignore what's going on out here, the noise, the VUCA, but you can check in on it once a week. You don't have to check on it every minute because it's not changing that fast. It's not impacting you. And as long as you're focusing on a good model here, your strengths, consistency, and simplicity methodology, you're going to be all right. It doesn't matter what's going on here. You just stay the course. So this is the model that I drew. So I showed you that this is the network of neuron side. This is the conscious mind side, and this is the handoff. And so this side here, low effort, low effort, right? And it grows. But over here, it also you have high impact, and then the impact decreases as you get to the conscious mind side. And I'm tracing the drawing that I did earlier. And this is what's going on. So if you take the first 600 milliseconds, and the reason I say 600 milliseconds is because that first, while it's a half second reaction time for the conscious mind, that first 100 milliseconds or so is pre-listening. This is that pre-listening. It's pre-subconscious, pre-conscious. It's just the network of neurons observing central nervous system in the brain, observing what's going on so it can predict what's likely. Neuroscientists tell us that the brain is more of a prediction machine than a reaction machine. It's predicting, and then when the thing happens and it's aligned with the prediction, that's a good thing. When the thing happens and it's more demand than the prediction, then that's where the brain creates more neurotransmitter, and that's how we live into the allostasis. In the first 200 milliseconds, that's why I drew the line with tenths of a second. The first one, you have readiness. This is just the initial detection. There are things you can do here. I've covered that in self-mastery, and I've covered them in other ones. I'm not going to go into it here, but essentially changing your perpetual question is one of the things you can do here. Over here, we want to literally condition the subconscious because it's happening too fast and it's at the network of neurons level. You're not going to do anything actively. You can actively change your perpetual question, but it's hard to do something actively here. You can use something like a swish pattern. Implementation intentions will have an effect, and but if you condition it in, you don't have to worry about it. And you're changing the bias of the subconscious to look for threats and assume that 80% of the stimuli are threat based, and shifts that to 80% of the stimuli are neutral and positive. And then you have the reaction formation. So this is where we'll get into maybe some of the anchors, because now you're getting ready to go into the conscious mind. You're feeling it, you're noticing it happening. You can anchor, you can do things like turning your attention, taking the deep breaths. There's things you can do here because now you're aware of that sensation. This is all happening inside of a half second, remember. Very, very quick. And then you have the handoff. And that's another view of it. Well, let's look at this. So yeah, the perpetual question, we condition the trajectory bias. I'll let you screenshot that if you want. And then fire a pre-trained anchor. And that pre-trained anchor could be taking a deep breath. It could be looking to the left or right. It could be squeezing your hand, whatever you've done that aligns with that kind of a meditative state. And so the way we do this is by using the 7-step reset. This you're having 30,000 daily stimulus response cycles. So you have to do something that's happening is every other second. You have to do something that manages it real time, and that's why we spend a lot of time here. So that in self mastery, we're mastering this part. Step 7, we're going back to mindfulness, back to presence, and then we're ready to move forward. And in here, we're making sure we're in coherence, and you're doing things on purpose to stay coherent. Because if you're coherent, it doesn't matter what hits you, you're going to be showing up as the best version of yourself. If you can't do this and you're coming in here, you're already triggered. Now you're in a triggered state, you're in a heightened state. It's going to be more difficult for you to navigate into a difficult step 3, which is where the stimulus happens. This is where the stimulus occurs, right here. And here's your response. Here's where your response ends, and then action is taken. And that's why I call it a reset. You don't need the conditioning that you have from 0 to 7 today in whatever it is you're doing. So questions. Why questions are universally used? Most any book you read that talks about questions, you'll see something along the lines of these bullets, if not all of them. They increase engagement and participation because you're getting people involved. Facilitators know this. You're losing the audience, ask a question. They build understanding and surface assumptions. You don't know what's in a person's head. I like to say that people are always moving towards convergence or they're moving towards divergence. And when they make a statement, I don't know which one it is. I know a data point. By asking a question, I can see, are they moving towards convergence, which could be leading to fight or flight, or they're moving to divergence, which means they're open to options and can explore. It reduces conflict by slowing reaction. So emotional intelligence uses a lot of questions, and it's because it slows down the system, everything. It slows down everything, which allows people to have more regulation. That's fine, and that works. What I'm saying is it's even better if you can regulate at the prevention side the way traction control does, and that's what dynamic leadership does. Questions promote reflection and learning, obviously, and then they improve decision quality. Leaders use questions all the time. I was talking to someone the other day, and they know to use questions in a sales situation because that's how you control the narrative. You ask a question, but it didn't register for them that other people are using questions to control them, and they were literally wanting to answer every question that comes their way because they felt they had a duty to answer those questions. And in sales training, we teach people that you hear the question, you want to rephrase the question into one that you want to answer. It's kind of the same thing. You don't have to answer the question that was posed. What I would say is if it comes in 3 times, I'm going to answer it. If it's the first time, I'm going to do just a bypass. The second time, I might give a response. But the third time, if it's the same question, I know that they really want to know the answer, and I'll give them an answer. But you don't have to do that right out of the chute is the point. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting and would point to. So we already trust questions. Next, I want to look at how we start using them in dynamic leadership. So they're not just insight tools. We usually think that they help people think. They also help us think, but they help people stabilize. And remember, I was talking about coherence and modulating and regulating. Questions can help with regulating. Changing the perpetual question changes the nature of your reaction to a given to the unknown stimulus that you know is coming at some point. So a well-timed question interrupts automatic reaction, but you have to catch it early enough. If you're already scaling and escalating, a question is not always going to do it because there's too much fear in the system. The brain shifts from defending to gathering data. This is what I'm talking about. If a person is converging, I want to ask them a question. When I say converging, moving towards fight or flight. And when I say diverging, I mean moving towards coherence and possibility thinking. So if I see a person converging, I will seek to ask them a question that takes them up a level into a bigger picture. Because usually if they're converging, they're focusing on what is this going to mean to me today? We want to shift that, or what is it going to mean to me this week? We want to shift that and bring it into the context of the bigger picture. What's the bigger positive context? And it's not reframing at this point. It's just getting them to shift their attention off of this one little inconvenience and catastrophizing on an inconvenience to recognize that inconvenience is going to be gone by tomorrow because of whatever, it depends on the situation. The answer reveals emotional trajectory. That's what I was talking about. I get a data point. The next question I'll know, are they diverging or converging? That's why a lot of coaches, you'll hear them when somebody comes online to ask a question, like on stage or whatever in a live event, they always ask a follow-up question because they need to know which direction they're going. The leader is steering state, not extracting information. That's important. That's a big difference in how questions are talked about before. We are in dynamic leadership, we are steering the state because you're doing it at the low effort, high impact side of the equation. The question is not reflection, it's intervention. This is how we take what we know about self mastery and start applying it, because I can't change the other person. I can create an environment that allows them to lean into their desire to change because it's meaningful for them. And you have to see it and detect it, at least at the subconscious level, your network of neurons side, to be able to pick up on it and do something about it. So what the brain actually does, the brain predicts first and reacts second. The mind constantly predicts what is happening, or I should say the brain is constantly predicting what is happening. Certainty increases emotional intensity, and a question forces model updating. So when you feel certain, and this is where people argue about something that doesn't even make sense. Hey, you've heard arguments and they're just arguing, don't even know what they're arguing about, but they know they have to stay on this point. The thing could be debunked, and this is where you have people attacking character because there's so much emotional intensity behind it. They have no counter argument, so they attack the person's character, or they do the whataboutisms or whatever. And then a question forces their model to shift if the question can get through. But you have to ask a question in such a way that it's not going to just create another reaction. And then updating lowers threat activation. So by the model updating, we're lowering the threat activation. Change the problem, the brain thinks it's solving, right? You're changing that. And this is why sometimes the better question is one that takes a person to a whole nother frame. This is what I mean by going up a level. You can also go out a level. By going to a completely different frame, they have to go introspective for a moment. And when they go introspective, they are updating their model. When you see their eyes go back and forth, you know that you just broken through, or possibly you've just broken through. So there's a lot of sensory acuity obviously involved here. Then we have converging versus stabilizing versus overexpanding. This is what I had been alluding to. We're steering direction, not controlling feelings. By steering direction, you avoid the feelings. By emotional modulation, we're avoiding feelings because once a feeling gets escalated, that turns into a neurobiological event, and then it's lodged into the network of neurons. You have cortisol and adrenaline flowing. It's a lot harder to come back from the edge. Converging, narrowing towards rigidity. So like I said, fight or flight, you could say rigidity. And stabilizing is focus and engage. That's integration. So we don't want to go into that fight or flight or rigidity. The other way of narrowing or overexpanding is chaos. So these are the two sides of coherence. You have rigidity on one side, chaos on the other. One is coming from getting too narrow. The other one is overexpanding. This would be the catastrophization. This is where I said a person is worried about what option is going to come. So they have a situation and there's 5 potential outcomes. One outcome is positive for them. 4 outcomes are negative, and they catastrophize by looking at the 4 outcomes. They worry about them. And then so much anxiety comes as a result that not only are they looking at the 4, which is like negative goal setting because now they're making pictures of what they don't want. Not only do they look at them, they start to collapse them into one. So now they're treating like all 4 of those negative outcomes are going to come at the same time. And it's just so overwhelming for them. And this is where you see the person just catastrophizing, and it's all internal. There's no new information coming outside. They're just escalating inside. And that would be a form of the overexpanding. Answers tell you which direction the person is moving before you see it. By the time it's happening, it's too late. You've lost the narrative. You lost the initiative. Good leaders don't calm emotions. They redirect trajectories. And what I'm suggesting is you can redirect trajectories probably earlier than you ever thought you could. Most good leaders have figured out how to do it, and they're doing it, which is, this works. This people are doing this already, but by understanding the model at what's in play, and that's why I broke it down into the first 600 milliseconds, where we have two tenths, two tenths, two tenths, because that's where you have the most amount of power, but it has to be done at the subconscious level. You first start working the subconscious level with yourself for self mastery, and then you start applying that subconscious level to others. Then we have where this is where dynamic leadership lives. Most models regulate after the emotion forms. This intervenes before brain reaction begins automatically. Expression can still be intercepted. Rapid recovery prevents visible behavior. That's like my traction control example. And stability is fast correction, not absence of activation. So the reaction starts neurologically, but never becomes behavior. This is similar to what I was saying in that with traction control, from an engineering perspective, you can't say the skid never happened, because it does happen. It just happens so fast, and it's recovered so fast that it's not felt and it's not noticeable. The same thing here. It looks like stability, but you had a neurological change, but it's just that you recover so quickly that it doesn't turn into anything. The operational method, every question performs three operations: interpret pattern completion, diagnose regulation direction, and select the next intervention. So we want to broaden the focus or deepen accordingly. Like, that's going to be something that you adjust. Dynamic leadership is real-time steering of emotional formation. So here's a table. Before behavior forms, there's a brief preconscious window where prediction and arousal can still be redirected. That's what we're talking about. Leadership works best when it acts inside that window, not after reaction. That makes sense. So the mechanism, automatic reaction begins. This is early on, right? Predictive threat appraisal activates, interrupt with a question. Prediction is suspended. Brain shifts to data gathering. It slows escalation. Then you have the direction is revealed. Rigidity, integration, chaos become visible. You can see what direction you're going in, and then you can choose your response type from there. So this is a dynamic feedback loop system. You're asking questions and watching what's going on. Emotional trajectory is altered, and then expression prevented or reduced. This is what I mean when I say the neurological shift may have happened, but it's not visible, and it doesn't create any sensation for the person. Expression prevented or reduced, guide the conversational path, and then stability emerges. Rapid recovery before behavior, and it appears as composure. So this is that cycle that we're talking about, and the more you can do this with yourself, the easier it becomes to do it with other people. And I want to take a look at a live example here. Right. So this is something I got this from Dr. Carolyn Frost, Lifestyle Design. You can check her out, healthymindsetliving.com. These infographics on emotional intelligence are good for looking at what the best practices are in emotional intelligence. And you can see these are some of it says emotionally intelligent people use under pressure. It's 12 sentences. I won't go through every one. You'll get the gist. I need a minute to think this over. This is giving them some space, but it's happening at the outside. Let's do this. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah. And we'll change this. So you have, I need a minute, right? Is that going to be okay? I'm not seeing it. Hold on. All right. I lost my dot. That's right. Now I need a minute to think this over. What's happening is typically people are doing that over here because they've already become aware of it. What you can do though is you can build this in as a habit. I would not try to build in all 12 sentences. I find the one that you like. Help me understand this. You might have two or three. Speakers use this. If you watch public speakers, they'll do this. They'll slip into facilitation mode where when they're like in the Q&A where they're answering questions, they have these pre-programmed or conditioned responses. So let me make sure I understand you correctly, and then they'll restate the question. If I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is, and those are just automatic. They come out while the person is thinking about what question they're going to ask. So the audience member asks a question, they deliver that conditioned reaction, and they're thinking about the question, and then they're going to rephrase the question to one that they want to answer. Help me understand this. That's interesting. Can you tell me more? And we can go on. I notice I'm feeling reactive. I don't like that one, but let's pause and come back to this. That's another good one. What would a good outcome look like for you? Another good one. So these are different questions. And here's how you can apply this now. When you set habits, I talk a lot about changing habits at the network of neurons side. And we do talk about how to do it, but there's so many levers and it depends on the person. I have to see what's going on and what's breaking down before I can just decide what's going to work. But there are different tools, obviously, visualization, mental rehearsal. But one of them that you can use starting today is implementation intention. You can pick a system, and I say when you do this, don't use something that's difficult or challenging or triggering. Start with something easy. You first want to build a skill, then apply it to real world situation. So you start with something easy and you say, when this happens, I'm going to do that. If you're in sales, you can say, if the person doesn't give me a firm yes, I'm not going to go into the presentation. The reason I do it that way, I'm not going to go into the close. So if they don't give firm answers to my yes questions, or then I'm not going to go into the close. That becomes a gate. And it's just an example. If you're leading and you have somebody who's been kind of challenging, and or maybe you're moving forward and you have the early adopters and you have the late adopters and they typically resist, when the person shares resistance, I'm going to, and it might be, what would good outcome look like for you? That might be somewhere where you use that question. My point is, you can use implementation intentions as part of mental rehearsal to say, when this happens, I'm going to do that. Now, you can't just say it one time. That would be like training your dog to sit one time and then taking it out in front of a room at a party and saying, watch my dog do this trick. He's never going to do it. It's too much stimulation. You have to condition this. You have to do the implementation intentions, and you can do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're going to practice it 5 times the first day, 4 times the second day, 3 times the third day, 2 times the fourth day, 1 time the last day. Just mentally rehearse. And when I'm talking about mentally rehearsing, we're talking less than a minute. You can do this in 90 seconds. You can say, when this happens, I'm going to do that. And I would verbalize it. You can think it, but by verbalizing, you're activating the network of neurons. And I would give the wording the same. I would use the same wording because that makes it more uh, it's more repetition. If you're changing it all the time, you're not repeating the same thing. So you want repetition. Over time, you will be able to get the effect of an implementation intention just by deciding that this is what you want to do, because you're moving the conscious mind into more of a control point over the subconscious and the network of neurons, rather than being the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. So this is just one example, and like going around the horn here. Can we explore other options together? I'm not ready to decide yet. You don't have to decide, right? These are things that you can, but again, I would not try to condition all of them. I'd pick one or two, use implementation intentions, and then condition it. So I'll drop that down. And again, I got this from Carolyn Frost, and I found her on LinkedIn. Let's go back to and so that's the effective leadership is not managing reactions after they occur. It's helping is shaping the trajectory early enough that regulation happens before behavior ever forms. That's the thing that we're doing here. And back to the earlier slide, it's not just getting through this barrier that we have to contend with, it's dealing with all the VUCA up here, the shiny stuff, the scary things, all of the internal representations, the I don't want power. That's also what we have to manage. So dynamic leadership is not a once and done. You have to, it becomes a style of how you lead all the time. And it becomes natural because you're doing it at the habit level. The automaticity is happening at the habit level. So I go live every day, usually at 7 o'clock, sometimes at 8. My tendency is to go 8 on Mondays just because there's more going on. Depends on schedule. And this week I may not, it'll be different because I'll be out of town and we'll see how things work. I'm experimenting, trying to upgrade my mobile situation because I needed something to lock in on a signal, and I think I have a really good hotspot that should work anywhere now because I go into the mountains, and in the mountains you never sure what kind of signal you're going to get. Anyway, that's I do this live, and then February is one-to-one leadership, and then March will be executive leadership, setting the climate. And it all comes back to what we were talking about today, this dynamic leadership. So I'll be using these examples over and over, and I'll introduce things that you can do on purpose. Then I have a workshop on the 26th, and this is where we teach the self-mastery. So this is foundational to dynamic leadership. You can go to 7stepreset.com/mastery, or that link at the bottom of that slide also works, but the 7stepreset.com/mastery is easy to remember. And we cover the exercises real time. This is all live, no AI, no recordings. It's all live, and it's interactive. So you actually you actually practice the different levers and drivers that we use to have that control, that agency and personal leadership. So that's the first. So today was the first one of the series in looking at using questions. We'll stay on that for a while. And it's not just questions, it's intervention methodologies that happen along the way that you can condition in at the network of neurons level. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.